Bass, who's recognized for 5 minutes.
Let me just begin by thanking the Attorney General for your patience, because it seems to me every couple of months we go through this exercise with you, and I appreciate your patience. I have 3 questions. One, I want to join others in expressing concern and frankly condemning what I understand as the targeting of conservative groups by the IRS. Frankly, it brought back memories from several years ago when I remember liberal groups being targeted, and it was before my time in Congress, but I certainly remember when African-American churches were targeted by the IRS, and it frankly sent a chill through the community. I wanted to know if during that time, if an investigation was done, and if so, what was the result and what were the consequences?
I'm unaware of any, I don't know what happened with regard to those matters.
Well, I think it would be interesting to find out if investigations had been done, because the way I am hearing this characterized, it was as though this is the first time the IRS has done something like this, and I certainly remember very well this happening to liberal groups. My second question is, if Congress had passed the Free Flow of Information Act in 2007, how would the situation have been handled with the Associated Press?
I'm not familiar with the Free Flow of Information Act. All I can say is that I know that with regard to the SHIELD law that we proposed, that there were greater protections that would have been in place for members of the press, though, as some have noted, there was a national security exception. But I think that in the view of the administration, that a SHIELD law should still be something that we work on together, and that we can craft a national security exception that would give the press adequate protection while at the same time keeping safe the American people.
What happened to the SHIELD law?
Excuse me?
What happened to it? You said it was in the SHIELD law?
It was proposed and then was never passed. I don't think ever really seriously considered, but it was pushed. I certainly talked about it during my confirmation hearings, and I think during my first hearings as Attorney General, the President was behind it, but it was never passed.
So had that been passed, it would have alleviated the situation that we just experienced with the Associated Press?
Well, again, I'm recused from that case, but I think it would certainly have would have had the potential to have an impact on all national security stories.
Okay, well, switching subjects completely and talking about trafficking, an area that I'm very interested in working on child welfare issues is the trafficking, in particular sex trafficking, of minors who were in the child welfare system. And I wanted to know if anything is being done at the federal level to ensure that youth that are designated as victims in juvenile courts are treated as victims as opposed to criminals. And I wanted to know if, given the existing federal law included in the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, how can we work with local jurisdictions to ensure that youth do not have criminal records due to their victimization?
Yeah. I think that's actually very important, and I think that what we need to do is come up with mechanisms by which we identify best practices. Also, you know, in spite of sequestration, we come up with ways in which we allow which we provide local and state jurisdictions with the necessary funds, perhaps to reform their systems, because the reality is that too many young people who are victimized in the way that you have described can be characterized as criminals, as prostitutes, when in fact they are simply victims. Now, you would hope that prosecutors would exercise appropriate discretion and charge only the appropriate people. But that is not always the case, and that's why the identification of best practices and raising the sensitivity of people who exercise that discretion is so important. And I think that the federal government should take the lead in that, given that human trafficking generally is something that we have identified as a priority, and sex trafficking of minors specifically as a priority.
And maybe I can work with your office in the future, because I frankly think that no juvenile should ever be arrested for prostitution. I don't know how you can prostitute if you're under the age of consent. I mean, to me, that would be rape, and maybe there's a way that we can change it so a child is never charged with that.
Right. I think I would look forward to that. There are clearly going to be services that need to be made available to such a juvenile, but that does not mean that that juvenile should have to get them as a part of being a part of the juvenile justice system with all the stigma that there is therefore attached to that treatment.
Right, absolutely. And then finally, what is the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention doing to prevent now on the foster youth from entering the criminal justice system? So I'm not referring to trafficking. I'm referring to what's known as crossover youth.
With what you said?
Crossover youth, meaning crossing from the dependency to the delinquency system. So the question is, what is the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention doing to prevent this?
Well, again, we are identifying best practices. We make grants. We hold conferences. It's one of the things that, sequestration, when we talk about cutting back money and cutting back on conferences, I understand that. But one of the things that OJJDP does so well, the Office of Justice Programs does so well, is through conferences, is bring together people to talk about these kinds of issues, identify best practices, and then come up with determinations as how we're going to, what practices we're going to fund. So that is what OJJDP is doing in that regard. As always, trying to find, again, best practices, identifying negative practices that are occurring, and then trying to support those things that are occurring and that are in the best interest of our children.
Thank you. The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Okay. Thank you.
If she has additional questions, please submit them for the record. And the chair now recognizes the gentleman from